Hey, welcome. Let me start by going through the Acknowledgement of Country. And we'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we create and stream from today. We'd also like to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Hi, my name's Jon Barrie. With me today, I have Paul Murphy, our guest. Hey, Paul.
How you doing, John?
I'm good. You sound really good. That microphone looks like a serious setup.
Oh, very serious. It's all about connecting with me through audio.
Awesome. So today is really going to focus a lot on stuff that you've actually been building a lot of content around for a little while. I refer to you as a guru of motion graphics and essential graphics inside of Premiere Pro. So what I wanted to do though before we went down the rabbit hole, which we will do very quickly, is just go through some of the new things that were part of the announcements of 2023 releases of Premiere Pro. After Effects as well has got some new things coming up, but I've got just on screen here, and anyone who's watching right now, let me know in the chat if you want me to bring this back later on. But if you took a screenshot of these QR codes, you'd be able to then use your phone to go and do some searching for more detail. But I wanted to do a very top level on what Premiere Pro has, including some of the new features to do with the essential graphics and the way that you can organize and create different graphics inside of the new engine. So before we go into your content by building these from scratch, I just wanted to touch on these. So there's a few different levels of what's new with the 23 release. And for the pro level users who need AAF support, that has now been put into the Apple Silicon version of Premiere Pro. You had to run Rosetta, Premiere Pro in Rosetta mode, which was using the Intel code base in order to get access to AAF, but that's no longer the case. So with the latest version of 23, you can go in and use all of the power that you get by running in native Apple Silicon code and use the AAF export. And also ARRI Alexa 35 cameras. So they shoot in a RAW format and they also shoot in a ProRes format. And both of those formats are now compatible with Premiere Pro 23. Then we got some other types of updates, which I call performance updates. And GPU has now been used to help with the lumetri scope. So if any of you have ever hit playback and you've got the scopes, color scopes up on Premiere Pro, you might have noticed there's a bit of a performance lag. That's now been addressed, and they're using the GPU to help draw up what the scopes are actually doing. So you should see a much better improvement on the scopes playback when you have them up while hitting play. And the preview, so when you do a render in the timeline and it goes green, the codec that was used was quite an old one. It used to be MPEG-2, and now it's using ProRes. So Apple ProRes is very common. It's a great quality codec, and it's not a very high data rate when you use the LT version, and that's now the new default for
the LT is the default?
That's the default. You can go and change it to whatever you like. You know how to change it, but now that if it's just quick speed and not a lot of data to have to get it out, you can use the default as ProRes LT. So a couple more performance related updates here. ABC Intra is a specialized version of MPEG-4. It's high compression, but it's really also high quality. And when you're shooting 10-bit, we've had performance playback issues in the past, and now that's been addressed. So you can get up to twice as fast playback speeds and response to scrubbing through that content. Again, more GPU handling all that stuff. And then motion graphics templates, kind of connected to what we're talking about today. I'm going to walk through today. But the multi-frame renderer that came in an update last version of After Effects in 22, that has now ported over to being able to use the multi-frame renderer inside of Premiere Pro. So motion graphics templates from After Effects should render twice as fast as they were before. So that's a pretty big plus, I would say. Now, these are the new things to do with essential graphics. And for whatever reason, oh, there we go. Now it's playing. Um, the inner and outer strokes functionality wasn't there before. So if you had to do some sort of graphics related or text related stuff where you wanted stroke effects, you had to do that design work outside of Premiere Pro in order to get the kind of look that you were after. So now that's inside. This gives you heaps more flexibility. So we'll touch on that as we build from scratch today. And then also in the Essential Graphics updates, we've got some new functionality where you can select multiple layers and treat them like they're a group. So if you wanted to justify to the left or the right, it wouldn't be justifying each layer to the left. It would be treating it as a selected group. And there's a little drop-down option there that you can select, and then you can change the way that it's responding to your selections if you've got more than one layer involved in your design work. And that's been asked for a while, so I'm pretty stoked to see that one come in. And then the last one, before we get stuck into it, is the ability to select multiple graphics clips and then start making some global changes, such as if you decide that the font isn't what you want anymore. You can see here we've got like several different fonts across several different clips there. You can select them all and then select the font, and then the font will ripple through all of the selected clips and all the layers that have got text on them. So that's a really handy one, because before you had to select one at a time and maybe use a style guided thing and set that, and it was much more clicks, much more work.
And that'll be useful with captions as well.
Oh, hugely. Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. So we're going to get building. Paul is going to take over from here, and I'm going to, ask everyone who's watching live, could you just say hi and tell us where you're coming from? I'm really keen to sort of understand what part of the world you're coming in live from. We're in Melbourne. Actually, we're both based in Melbourne, and it is about 1 o'clock-ish. So it might be the morning for you if you're in another part of Asia Pacific. It could be in the evening if you're part of the North America, South America end of the spectrum. So let me know where you're coming in from. If you've got any questions, don't be afraid to jump in and ask as we go. We're going to start building. Paul, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, JB. Yeah, I would love to get questions. In fact, I have a lot of content to get through, but there is nothing I love more than a good question that will just derail everything I have planned, because I love going down rabbit holes, especially with what we're talking about today, which is lower thirds, of course, but lower thirds working directly inside the Essential Graphics panel. The Essential Graphics panel is one of these things that has popped up in Premiere Pro. I'm going to guess, I think it's been in there for about 5 years now. And I'll never forget the first time I sort of opened it up and started playing around with it, having used the legacy titler for so long. And I was sort of like, oh, wow. I mean, I can kind of do anything now. There's like the amount of effects and animation that I can add to this in an easy way is really kind of unlimited. And that's why, as I've seen it develop over the years, I've really liked sort of getting in there and playing around with it. And I find that because I do work as an editor and also as a motion designer, and as a motion designer, my tool of the trade has for a long time always been After Effects. If I wanted to do anything worthwhile, I would go to After Effects. I find that more and more I can say, you know what, 50% of the time I'll just stay in Premiere because I know I can make something really good there. So that's what I really like to see, is being able to stay in that application. But yeah, we're going to talk about lower thirds, and to sort of make sense of this, I have divided this up into some categories. So we're going to talk about design, so designing our lower thirds and the variations that we can do there to start with. Then we're going to talk about adding animation to those designs. And the very last category, which is my favorite category and my favorite thing to do in the Essential Graphics panel, is to play around with effects. So basically the effects that we have over here in our effects panel, we can use all of them to create some amazing stylish graphics in our Essential Graphics panel. But we're going to start with something very simple, and that is just adding our text and making it look good, making it stand out. So To get started, I've got, I'm just using a background here of somebody shooting a video because we're talking about social media graphics here. And I'm just going to add some text here. Now, maybe you have a few different ways that you like to do this. Maybe you go over to the Essential Graphics panel over here and choose New Layer Text. I would not judge you if you did that. You could also go up to the menu up here and choose New Layer Text. But look, there is this really handy shortcut here that is going to save you every time. And that is if you just press Command T or Control T on PC, you've automatically got your new layer there. And I am well familiar with this default font that we go to whenever I add a new layer here. We're using Minion Pro, which is probably not what I'm looking for in terms of social media graphics. The first thing that stands out here is this is a serif font, and a serif is all these little squiggly bits at the end of the font. And that makes it really hard to be able to read a font, especially in video. So most of the time we're working with serif fonts, or sans serif fonts, sorry. Unless, of course, you're doing something like a title. When you're doing like a title for a project or a film or something like that, then a serif font can look really good. Here we want something clean and easy to read. So we want to change this font. And maybe you know this, some people don't. And that is that with your Adobe ID, you actually have access to thousands of fonts for free. But that's not the selling point for me. Is the fact that we have access to fonts with our Adobe ID makes this really good for working in teams and also really good for working across multiple computers. So for example, I'm about to jump on a plane tomorrow. I'm going to take my laptop with me and all of my work because I like to work on a plane. And I'm not thinking to myself, oh, have I got that font for that particular project? I better make sure that that's installed on that machine. And when I get to my location, the machine I use there, I've got to have the font installed there. Because with the Adobe ID, if it detects that that font is not on that computer, it just automatically downloads it. And this is the same thing whenever I start working on a team and they're using, and they could choose on any font, but they choose one that they have to install manually. I'm always like, no, let's just go with something from the Adobe Fonts library. And to show you how to do that, all you need to do is go up to your graphic and titles menu up here, and you want to choose add fonts from Adobe Fonts. And that is going to open up a browser, which I'll just drag across over here. And here we can basically choose all of the different fonts that we want to work with. You can also type in the text that you'd like to, so you can get a sample of what it's going to look like. And I think for something like social media, we're probably talking about working with something that's clean, and we probably want something that's a bit chunky. So I'm going to turn the weight up here. So I'm going to click this big G, and now we're looking at a lot more bold fonts. And also, as I said, we don't want something with serifs on it. So I'm going to make sure that we're choosing sans serif. And now we have all these different fonts that we can choose from. Yeah, what's speaking to me right now? I think maybe this Forma DJR. Let's have a look at that. And that's going to open up the family of the font. And you can see there are many different weights that we can choose from. And maybe I'll go with something like, let's go with the Forma DJR medium and something a little bit lighter as well. Let's just go with the light one here. So
do you go through phases where you like different styles for a while? Like
it's worse than that, JB. Every time I need to pick a new font, I go straight here and pick a brand new font. I should have, you can actually add a favorites list over here. You can actually add something, you can star a font, and that will always show up at the top of the list. But that would be useless to me because I'm changing fonts every single time. And the other great thing about this is not only will it download it, but I don't have to restart Premiere in order to start using that font. It's already there for me. So I can just type in Forma, and there are those two fonts that we just saw. So I'll choose medium for this layer, and I'll type in the name of this person, which I'm going to assume is Sarah Person, and she is somewhere. And really important thing, I think, like the crux of graphics in video is always, you should always be thinking of a hierarchy. What is the most important thing that people need to be looking at? And then downgrade the hierarchy in terms of design beyond that point. So For example, if it was really important that people understood the name and the somewhere was something a little less important, you would drop the size of this. I'm going to drop this down to 70, and I might also choose that light font. So we've got a hierarchy, so we get that name and then you read the next line. And
those that are watching sort of live, I just wonder, is that something that you guys are familiar with? Is that an approach that is new to you, to come up with different formatting, different design based on that hierarchy of, what is most important and what's a secondary bit of information? I'm curious to know.
Yeah.
And we do have some people from Canada, which is pretty cool. And then we've got from Colombia living in Canada, and India. Yeah, we've got people from all over. So
great.
Yeah, we keen to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, hierarchy is like the most important thing when you're thinking about design. You're always thinking, what do I want the viewer's eye to go to? And as you may have picked, it's not really going to this title at the moment because it's sort of getting lost in all of the detail behind it in the video image. And we really need to make that lower third really jump out. And there's not enough contrast in the background there for us to be able to make it out. And if you are doing a sort of minimal graphic like this, that's where you have to sort of subtly get that contrast into the image. So I could certainly go and turn on the shadow down here, and I might just turn that up to a black. And you can see that's standing out a bit better. We can read that better now. If I turn that off, you can see that's really hard to make out. Shadow is really adding something there. And you can actually add multiple shadows as well. So you can add, a harder shadow to really make the text punch out, and then a wider shadow that sort of covers the space behind. But whenever I try and solve this problem, I find the best thing is to actually add an effect to the footage itself to make that lower third stand out. So what I would actually do in this situation is I would go to the Lumetri color panel, and there's a lot of different ways of doing this. Everybody has the way they prefer to do it, but I always like to go down to curves. Curves is something that I've been using in After Effects for a long time, and know it from Photoshop as well. And basically it's just this line. Down here we have our shadows, and this is going to make the shadows darker. And then up here we have our highlights. This is going to make the highlights brighter. And of course in the middle we have our midtones, and we can turn them up or we can turn them down. And what we want to do is go to those highlights and turn them down until we can't see, well, not that we can't see, we want to turn it down until that text is sort of punching through a bit better. And I can see that is definitely making an improvement there. If I turn my curves on and off, you can see that's much more legible. I might also turn the midtones down a bit as well to just make it a little bit more natural. But of course, we can't just do this with the image. We can't just darken the image for the sake of the text. We need to subtly have this just happen around the text. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to my effect controls over here. And in our effect controls, there's my Lumetri color effect. And I want to turn on a mask for this. I'm going to use the Create Ellipse mask, so that the effect is only being applied inside of this mask here. And I'll just stretch this out across the text. And like I said, the name of the game is subtle. I want this to be subtle. And at the moment it's not, because I've got hard edges around that effect. So what I'm going to do is go over to the mask feather here, and I want to start to turn this up until I feel like it's sort of blending into the image better. And I mean, that's not too bad. I feel like I'm sort of aware of it a bit. I might actually expand the mask up a bit more. And now that I've got it there and I can see that the text is really standing out, I might want to actually start to dial that effect back a bit. And I can do that with the mask opacity. So I'm just going to dial this back until I feel like it's disappeared a bit, but it should still be making an effect to that text standing out. So if I dial that back just to about there, now I can read the text. But if I toggle this on and off, you can see how much of a huge difference it's making in having that text stand out. So that's just a little tip to make sure that when you're using minimal titles like this, so very clean, no backgrounds or anything like that, that's a good way to make them stand out. Now, another thing I might add here is if this is a social media video, Maybe I want to add something like a logo or something to the design. So I'm going to go back over to the Essential Graphics, and you can actually just add any kind of asset into your Essential Graphics clip here. So I can add videos, I can add PSD files, I can add PSD layers if I want, and it will also take like vector images and things like that. What I do, because I sort of move around a lot, I move from different computers and I'm sort of on the move a lot, I like to use libraries for any kind of logos that I'm regularly using, because it means that so long as I'm logged into my Adobe ID, I have access to those images wherever I am. So long as I log in, I can grab it. So I've actually created a library over here for our session, and I've just added in some social media icons that I might want to use for this. And let's go with the Instagram logo. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to the project. You've got to add it into the project file. So I'm going to say add to project, and then there it is in the project file. Now I'm going to click this and drag this up into the Essential Graphics panel, and it's come in all nice and big. I'll just I'm resizing the whole thing. Now I need to select the logo, and I might actually use these handles here to make this smaller, and maybe something like that. And then I'll move my text across. I'm using the position controls here to move this across. And there we have a really nice design. Now, that's if you want to go with like the sort of minimal approach for your titles. If you wanted something where there's a bit more of a background to your text so that it really pops out from your image, then you're going to want to look into adding a background. And I might just duplicate this sequence. So I've got a few different versions of it. I'll call this minimal. And then I'll call this one, what should I call this one? Let's call it auto background, because we're going to automatically add a background to this text. I'm just going to get rid of this logo for the moment, just because it doesn't quite relate to what I'm talking about. But if I wanted to add like a solid background behind this, I can go down here in my Essential Graphics panel, and you can see we've got the option to turn on background. And if I turn that on, it's actually added a dark background behind the text, which I think we can all agree is making the text stand out a lot more. But it's also set the opacity to 75% here. So I can actually see through that image. And this is actually really good when you're adding something like captions or something like that. But probably for a lower third, I would want something a bit more solid. So I'm going to turn this all the way up, so we've got a solid color. And what else should we do here? Let's also, it's quite tight around the edges of the text. I'm going to expand out the edges so that we've got a nice bit of buffer around the text. And I love this setting as well. I can't remember how long this has been in there. We also have the option to make those sharp edges curved. I think this is like 6 months ago maybe that we added this, maybe more. If I turn that up, it starts to curve those edges to the background.
That's a cool function.
I love it. To do something like that from scratch with another shape is a bit more time consuming, but here I am, I can automatically do it like that. And the other great thing about doing it this way, because we've got so few layers working here, if I wanted to change the text in here, maybe we change this to Peterson, you can see that that background is automatically growing with the text as well. So that's really good. There are a few limitations to doing it this way that I should mention. And those limitations are gradients. So if I go into the color of my background here, you can see all I can do is choose a single solid color. The other limitation, which I might just change the color of this because gray is not helping me here. Incidentally, just as a side note, whenever you're trying to choose a color for something that will be sort of harmonious within your frame, unless of course you have like branded colors that you always use, I find a really good technique is to just grab a bit of color from somewhere else in the frame and just sort of accentuate that. So this woman here has really nice red hair, but I think it's a little too close to the title, but something like this green of the trees, I think is going to add a really nice bit of style to our image. Now it's come in with this sort of off green here because that's the green of the trees. And I just like to sort of accentuate that a bit. So I'm going to go into my saturation settings here. We have hue, saturation, and brightness. In saturation, I'm just going to ramp this up to something a little bit more saturated. And maybe I'll just turn it down to something a little bit darker as well. And if I click OK, now we have a background that really sits in the color space of this really nicely. I think it works well with the hair and everything. That's if you've got the choice. Now, my point here, the whole reason that I changed that is I wanted to show you the other limitation, which is the drop shadow. So you'll see that I can't add a drop shadow to this background. It's adding it to the text. Similarly, if I wanted to add a stroke to this, it's going to add a stroke to the text. So those are the sort of limitations that we come up with. It's very easy, but it does sort of lock us out of certain design choices. So the way around that is to manually add a background, and I'll show you how to do that as well. I'm just going to duplicate this again, and let's call this one background.
Just earlier, you dragged and dropped in an image into the essential graphic clip stack, like as a layer.
Yes.
I just wonder how many people realize that you can do that, because that's pretty powerful. It's almost like having a nest where you've got these multiple layers. Can you put video in that list
You
of
certainly
layers
can.
as well?
You can put video in there.
Right.
With
Yeah,
when
that's
you
cool.
when you put video in, it will use the start of the video as the start of the graphic, and you really can't edit around that once it's inside of a graphic clip here. But what you can actually do is change the in and out point of it and turn it into a sub clip. So if you add an in and out point and say, I want my video to start here in my graphic, go up and press make sub clip, and then drag that into your essential graphics, and then you've got video in there. And you can actually create some amazing things with videos in the essential graphics panel.
So what happens at the end when you reach the end of the clip? Like, let's say your video clip is like 2 seconds long, but you want the graphic to stay up for longer than that.
From memory, it freezes. It actually just freezes on the last frame.
In frame.
Yeah.
That's super useful.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how you can create some amazing effects as well, as if you want a title that has like glowing lights inside of it. Well, then all you need to do is get some video of some glowing lights and actually use that as the background for your title. So you can actually do some pretty amazing things with this. The other amazing thing is adding Photoshop layers in there. I really like to do that because that means that I can start designing in this space here using all of these handy controls for position and scale and things like that, and also being able to snap to certain parts of the frame. Whereas the old way that we would do Photoshop layers is down here in the timeline panel, where the layers aren't actually talking to each other. It doesn't know what the other layer on another track is doing. So you keep it up here in the essential graphics panel, and you have access to all of these align tools, scale and everything like that. It's a much better way of working with Photoshop layers. But in terms of adding that manual background, I'll just show you how to do that and how we can sort of get around some of the convenience that we had doing it the other way. Is I'm just going to add a rectangle here. So we could go new layer and choose rectangle. I like to use the shortcut key Option Command R, or that's Control Alt R if you're on a PC. And I should have copied what that color was at the time, but I'll just grab it anyway, and I'll just ramp up that saturation as well. And I'm just going to drag this down underneath those other layers because we've got a stacking order here. And I'll just move this into place like that. And of course, we have access to all of those controls that we had when we had that automatic background. So we do have the ability to go over here and we can turn up that curved edges there. But of course, we also have the other advantage now of being able to add a stroke to that. So we've got a nice stroke around our background. And we can also add a drop shadow to that background, which is going to make it stand out from the image a lot better as well. But probably something that we don't have or at least we don't obviously have, that we had with the auto background, is the ability for this box to grow. So again, if I go in and change this name to Peterson, well, the box is not growing with that. But we do have the ability to do that. We've just got to set it up beforehand. And that's where using the responsive design settings over here come in handy. So what I can do is go to my shape in the stacking order. I'm just going to call that background so we don't get confused. And what I can do is, I'll just really zoom in so you can see what I'm doing here. I've got my background selected, and I'm going to say I want to pin this background not to the video frame, which is the overall size of our sequence, but I want to pin it to the name. I want to pin it to that text layer. And at the moment I haven't done anything, because what I actually need to do is pin what edges of that graphic I want to adjust with the position and scale of that text. And really just the quickest way to do this is to just click in the middle and say, I want you to pin it to all of those edges. So now that we have our background and it is pinned to the text, if I go into my text and I start making some changes here, you can see that our box is growing with it at the same time. So I think that's pretty cool. That means you've now got a graphic that you can roll out, across an entire project, and it will always update based on the data that you're putting in there.
Right, cool. So yeah, there's a question that's just come through about how the pin concept works, and the question is around, is it like grouping in other apps? It's a little bit different, and there is a grouping kind of function inside of this. It's called something different, but the idea is there. But yeah, basically the way the edges work, you can tell it to just stick to the top of another relative layer, or to the right or to the left or to both. So it only goes wide, or it only goes tall, or in this case you click the center and it goes to everything. So you type in more layers there, or more lines, it gets taller and it grows and sticks to it. So it's like a sticky edge. I describe the pin.
I really dug into this because I wanted to understand the rules a little bit better. And what I learned was that if you only turn on one side of this graph, so here I've turned on the left side and the bottom, now we're only adjusting the position of where this box is. So you can see that I can change this to Peterson, but the box is not growing. But if I go up to the text layer up here and I start moving this around, well, the box is moving with it. It's only when you have both sides of the graph ticked that now you're also not just adjusting position, but also scale. So now when I start making changes to my text, it starts growing with it, but it will also move around with it. So grouping is probably an interesting comparison in that regard. It is, you could almost say that it borrows from parenting, which is in After Effects, where you parent a layer to another layer. But it has that advantage of saying, well, I want you to parent it, but just the position. Or I want you to parent it, but scale and position. So you have those options there, depending on which side of the graph that you're clicking.
Just grouping in itself, though, how would you go about grouping like those sorts of layers together? So if you did want to move them around or do something as a group,
so grouping,
like an effect.
Grouping is the I'm going to say this, grouping is the single most powerful thing that you can do inside of the Essential Graphics panel. And I probably will not have the full time to go into the extent of it, but the most simple thing is that if I wanted to move all of these layers together around in the frame, maybe throughout my edit, this lower third is going to appear in different places. Well, the worst way to do that would be to select all these layers and start dragging them around. Probably the most organized way is to actually go here where we have this little create group button. And I'm just going to click that. It's put all of my layers into a group. But it's also, if I go up to the group here, you'll see that this has its own transform properties as well. So I can actually rotate this, I can scale it, but it means that I can move this around and it's moving all those layers together. And one of the really powerful things about this, although it's probably not obvious with this graphic here, but if this graphic, for example, if each of these layers had their own little animation in them, maybe the logo, for example, was sort of throbbing scale, well, that would be very difficult to then be able to adjust the scale of that and other things, because I'd have to override the scale of that throbbing in order to apply it to each individual layer. So I can actually keep that animation where this is sort of moving like that. But once I put it in a group, I've got a second scale effect that I can work with, and I can scale the whole thing while also keeping that throbbing scale inside of it.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And I think a lot of people probably would try to be doing things like that on different stacks of things in the sequence itself. So you're doing a lot of this work, and it's all happening within one clip on the timeline.
Absolutely.
With multiple stacked things. You mentioned a bit before that you can have effects operate in here too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I might jump into some effects now that we've got this design. Let me show you some stuff that we can do here. Probably the first thing that I wanted to show you over here is maybe not with that one, maybe with that one. I'm just going to turn that background off there. No, this one here. So if I select that and turn off the background for this one, probably the simplest way of animating these particular layers is to have them just animate the position, for example. And I'll just show you the quick way to play around with position for an individual layer here. I'll just jump forward a second, just using my magic shortcut key there. If you press 1 period, it's going to jump forward to 1 second. And all I need to do is go over here, and you'll see these are our position settings here. But if you look at the icon, if we actually click this icon here, we've now turned on animation for that particular layer, and it's created a keyframe for that particular position. Now I'm going to move back to the very start of the sequence, and I'm going to change the position of that layer. So I'll just drag this off camera. And now we have a really quick animation of this sliding on. And if you want to see what's going on under the hood there, we just go over to our effect controls panel over here. And you can see, yes, there are some keyframes being added inside of the text layer. What I can do is twirl open that text layer, and here are all of our keyframeable properties. I'm going to twirl up the source text. You can see there are those keyframes for position. And probably what I don't like about this graphic is the way that it slides in and just stops like that. I would much rather it if it eased in at the end. So by having access to our frames here, I can just right click this, and I can just say, give us an ease in. So now we have something like this, where it eases into the end of that. Now I do have a little bit of a problem with this, because you're sort of seeing it cross the line of the frame here. And I would rather it if there was like a bit of space here where we don't actually see that flying in. I might show this to you with the one where I had the logo in it. Let me just select this here, and I'll just add that same, probably 12 frames is better for this animation. I'll just add a keyframe there, and maybe I want this to slide in from behind that logo there. So I'm going to drag this off behind the logo. And so we have something like this, where it comes in like that. And I'll also go and turn on that ease in, because I think it looks nice. But here's the thing, is basically everything before the logo over here, I don't want to see that. I only want to see it once it's past the logo flying in. So for that, I'm actually going to need to add a mask where I'm not seeing any of what's underneath the logo or before the logo. And maybe you're familiar with masks over here in the effect controls. That's one way to do this. But there's actually a much better built-in way to do it inside of the Essential Graphics. And that is to just add a shape. So I'm going to add a rectangle here. And I'll turn off the shadow and the stroke for this. I just want the shape. And I'm going to just build out the area here where I want to start to see the image. So I want to see the image within, sorry, I want to see the text within this space here. Everything outside of that shape, I don't want to see it. And then I'm going to drag this up to the top of my layer stack. I'm going to name this mask because I'm very organized. And then down the very bottom here, I'm going to choose mask with shape. And when I click that, now I'll only be able to see that text inside of that shape. So if we want to see that text come out from behind the logo, oh, actually, there's an interesting lesson here. You'll notice that the logo has disappeared. Absolutely. We're seeing this come within the shape there, but the logo has disappeared. And this is an important lesson, is that there is a stacking order going on here. And anything underneath this mask will have that mask applied to it. And as you can see, that Instagram logo is having that mask applied to it. Very simple solution. All I need to do is just grab that logo and drag this above the mask. So now we have something like this, which I think is a pretty nice graphic.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, it looks like it's coming from behind it. That's really clever.
Yeah.
There's a question that's come through that's super interesting. And
Yeah.
I've seen this, but it's been a while. And it's got to do with the pinning and how that works with like auto reframe. So if you do have essential graphics that are like this, and then you needed to go about making this into a 9x16 or a square, what kind of experience have you got with the way that it can also reconfigure itself so then it's part of that
reframe
that
process.
realignment, that auto reframing kind of concept?
So maybe the example there is the pinning in terms of this here, because we did pin that background, didn't we? Yeah. I do find that when you go to different sizes, some of the results might not be exactly what you intended. So for example, if I was to go auto reframe sequence with this one here, and you said 9x16, didn't you?
Yeah, that's
vertical.
probably a common one. Like stories are pretty popular these days.
And then if we create this, we'll just wait for it to catch up. Now, disregard how the JPEG looks here because I've done a bit of scaling on it, but you can see, yeah, it's brought it in and it's reframed it. This is actually a percentage bigger or smaller, I think. Let me have a look here. Yeah, this is, oh wait, that's the logo. So the background there is 32% of the original. The original probably wasn't 100% though. So I don't think this has gone down to 100%. Wrong one. So our background here was, oh no, it was 100%. So we went down to 32%. Yeah, so we'll add a scale to that. And that's to taste, I guess. You have to sort of decide whether you did want it to go down to 30%, or if you wanted it to stay at 100%, maybe you could then scale it up again. And again, that's why it's good to put your graphics in group layers. So then I could just apply a universal scale to that to make it bigger. But I have found in the past that some of the results haven't been sort of consistent with what I expected. But yeah, parenting can be a handy thing in that instance. And I've actually found, you'll notice that there's like a lot of space down here, right? See all this space, whereas the actual original graphic was much closer to the bottom of frame. And I won't go into the example of it here, but just to let you know that a way around that is to actually add a shape to the bottom of the frame that has no fill at all. So it's basically an invisible shape, bottom of the frame down here, and you pin that graphic to that. And then when you create the new version, it will be equal distance to what it was in the 16:9 version as well.
Right. So then you take that invisible layer and you pin that to the frame.
And then you pin that to the frame. Exactly.
It's always going to be maybe the bottom left corner might be your pin. And so
yes, yeah,
you pin to the video frame of the bottom left corner. So then it's always going to be in that bottom left bit.
Exactly. And the way to think of that is if you had a graphic that was perfectly 100 pixels from the bottom, and then you threw it into this 9x16 one where it's shrunk it down by 32%, that will make it 32 pixels from the bottom, but it should also make it, 32 pixels from the side as well. So it's just going to make sure that that sort of relative distance from the frame is always maintained. That's quite a complicated thing to explain, but
It is
that's
a bit, yeah.
yeah, that's how I do it. Is I pin to invisible shapes, which by default are already pinned to the frame, and that will make sure that they stay in the position that I want them to.
Cool. Thanks for just walking through that a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be curious around that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to sort of look into pinning and sort of understand the rules when you start to move these graphics between different sequences. It's worth testing out. One thing I wanted to mention about what we just did, which was we had this lovely animation here where it's coming out from behind the logo. If I wanted to do that with something like this here, and I'll just move all these layers and get rid of this group for a moment. So if I wanted to have the exact same thing, so sorry to be repetitive here, but I'm just going to do that same animation. I'm going to turn off that pin just for the sake of this example here. And I'll move this off here. And we want the same animation, but we want to keep that background, right? So what I'm going to do is add that rectangle that we're going to call a mask. And I'll turn off the stroke and the shadow. And I'll just change it to a different color so we can make it out better. And let's say this is the area here where we want to mask. So we want to be able to see the image when it comes into this shape here. I'm going to mask with shape. And look at what's happened. Okay, now we got around this before because we were able to move that logo above, right? So that's all good. We can see that logo. But what am I going to do about this background? And the problem here is the background has to stay in the background. It's the background. If I move this up above the mask, I can't see my text anymore. And this is the third thing that groups do that I think are like the most important thing to learn about essential graphics is when you put something in a group, you can get a mask to only apply to those things in that group. And the same thing goes with effects. You can get effects to only apply to the layers that are inside of that group. So what that means is if I take my mask and I take my text layer and I put them into a group, so create group, well, now that mask is only being applied to my text. So now I can have my background, which is not touched by the mask, and our text will fly in like that. So that is like the most important thing to learn about groups is it allows you to target specific layers with masks and effects. And I feel like that's the basis of like any kind of graphic that you create.
Yeah, wow. That's I don't think many people realize how powerful that can be to be able to just isolate a specific kind of, in this case you're using a mask, but can you use other filters like blur, having something appear with a blur or something like that?
Yeah, probably like the biggest, the best example for me is if I was to use this layer here. I'm going to turn off the animation for this. I don't need this animating. Let's say this was 2 layers of text, and I'll just get rid of, the second line in the first one. So the first graphic is just the top line, and then the bottom graphic is the bottom line. And if I wanted to add like a linear wipe to this, if I drag this on, and I'll just do some quick settings for this linear wipe. So we want to have this graphic sort of fade in from side to side like this, right? But if we only wanted to do it to the first line, this is where groups will come in handy, because at the moment, this effect, this linear wipe, is being applied to everything underneath it. If I put the first line and that linear wipe in a group together, well, now that linear wipe will only be applied to that first line. Actually, what's happening to my first line there?
First line's empty.
First line's empty, right? Yeah, okay.
Whoops.
Well, let's put anything in the first line. Yeah, I must have gotten confused when I was typing.
It looks like your second line has still got both lines, maybe.
Yeah, there we go. That's better.
There we go.
So now you can see I'm only affecting that wipe on the first line. And like you said as well, this applies to any effect. So if I wanted to have a nice blur in there as well, the blur is only being applied to whatever is in that group. And again, I think that's like the essence of playing around with effects inside of the Essential Graphics panel, is playing around with groups like that.
That is super powerful. So you can still keyframe and animate those effects, and it stays inside that one motion graphics, Essential Graphics clip.
And there's a real sort of flexible power to that as well. So another example of that is, at the moment we've been doing effects using position controls, but there is another effect that controls position, and that is the transform effect. So I can add this as an effect inside of that group, and I could adjust the position of that effect. So I'm not adjusting the position of the graphics. It's an effect that's doing this. And now I've got that effect there. And that means that, like, if I change my mind and I want to put something else in this group, so if, for example, I decided I want to put that Instagram logo in there instead, and I'll get rid of that text, well, that effect just automatically gets applied to whatever is in that. So if you're adding new elements into that group, I don't have to go through and animate all of them with the position controls. It's just drop it in that group, and it will automatically take on those keyframes that I've put in there.
All right. Well, this is so cool, walking through all these different things, Paul. It's pretty amazing how many things are quite simple to actually apply once you understand the rules of the way that, like, the group bin works, and you can isolate effects and then have one use of an effect, but it can operate on multiple layers, and put video in here as well. This is super powerful and cleans up the timeline rather than being stacked with lots of different things. And
that's the best part.
Yeah, it's such a different way to approach making motion graphics in lower thirds. Like, you can build something pretty quick and make it look flashy. Yeah. Have you got any other, like, one really cool thing that we could let people take home?
Well, you know what? I reckon like probably like the big takeaway from where we are right now, and this is out to all of my After Effects homies out there. So let's just go back to where we were with our title here. And we've got this transform effect doing its stuff. Anybody who works in After Effects, their first question would be, where's my motion blur? And we can actually add that using our transform effect here. So if I go down to my transform effect, and what I want to do is uncheck use composition shutter, and I'm going to turn this shutter angle up to something like 180. Well, now that means that when that text flies in, it's actually got motion blur applied to it.
Motion blur, yeah.
So motion blur in the
really
Essential
cool.
Graphics panel. And that just makes the actual animation of it coming in much smoother as well. So it's a good thing to try and get in more of your graphics for sure.
Wow, it's pretty impressive. Like, yeah, it's so simple when you really start playing around with it. Thanks, Paul.
But my challenge to people would be, go out there, look at your effects panel, and just start playing around. Look up the word glitch. There'll be an effect called VR glitch that you can just throw on. It's meant for VR, but it creates a really gnarly effect on your text as well. Just play around with the effects and see what kind of interesting looks you can get.
Awesome. All right, we're going to wrap it up. Paul, thanks so much for walking us through all these different elements of how these motion graphics can be put together in the Essential Graphics panel. And yeah, it's really, really cool. How could people watch more of your content?
Check me out on YouTube. I'm the Premiere Pro.
What's your handle on YouTube?
Yeah, I'm the Premiere Pro on YouTube, and I'm posting videos as regularly as I can there at the moment.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us live, and for those of you who are jumping in later on, yeah, I hope you had a good time, and let us know in the comments if there's any other things you really want us to dig into. It's been great. Thanks again, Paul, and we'll catch everyone later.
Thank you, JB. Thanks, guys.